allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Miss Kathy, if you would take a roll, please.
Carter,
Here.
Hicken,
Here.
Walther.
Alrighty, we'll let you run with it, Scott, and we'll just take it from there.
All right, first one on the list is the subdivision regulation update. We have moved past step one and are on to step two, so everything in the packet here there's no more yellow. So we have everything compiled into one document. Now we're going to go over it and look to make sure we have everything in, it's consistent, spelling, grammar, kind of one last check before we take this forward. So now if there's a time that the development committee has comments or questions or anything, the document's kind of compiled, so now would be the time. So if you take a look and have questions or comments, feel free to let us know, but we're going to do an internal audit just to make sure that we have everything that we need.
Scott, do you anticipate that as we give you comments and those get changed and formed into a final draft, that we as a committee will make a recommendation?
Yeah, what we can do is because the next development committee is the second meeting in November, if we maybe shoot for that one, that we can have comments in, and then we'll compile it based upon any changes we see, and we'll have another presentation to development committee. And if how we've kind of been doing in the past, that if development committee is okay with it and recommends it move forward, we take that to planning commission and then go through the code amendment process. So if we have our second look at the end of November, it will be on the planning agenda in January, and then arguably the first or second meeting in February is when we're here before council for a public hearing.
Okay. As we're going over it, I'm going to open that invitation to all council members to look through it so they know that that's going on. That way we don't get to a point and then it gets tossed back.
Okay.
Just to go ahead, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation would be exactly what you just said, Ms. Carter, is to go ahead and let them see this document now, so comments can be incorporated. And then what you have as final draft is what we would look at in, I guess, November. Is that right, Mel?
Yeah.
And
First
then
meeting, yeah.
and then it would go to planning and zoning, and they would do whatever tweaks they deem necessary to it. But in the meantime, it would have been, and I'm sure you could forward it to council and just say,
Right.
we've been working on this for so long. Now's the right time to there's no big gaps. There's no, we need a citation here. That's the way it looked before, right? It's finally in that point where look through this, see what you guys think or gals think, and give us some comments, because you're going to see it again, and it's probably going to be at the final stage. So now's the best time to give us input.
Yes.
That input, you would want it a week before the development committee meeting, maybe, or
Yes.
ideally?
Ideally, yes. If there's comments that way, there's time to put them in. If there's questions on the comments, I can inquire and say, you mentioned this, what were your concerns?
I'd say for what it's worth, you also write yourself a note at the first meeting in November. You make sure that council, you put the bug back in their ear. When we go around for committee or the administrative reports, instead of just saying, it's in my report, just say, hey, I just want to remind everybody, comments are due by the end of this week on that XYZ.
Yeah, we could say
or
by November 10th, you think?
That's fine with me.
So you have like a solid week and a full week into, okay.
And with these, the problem we were running into that the regulations weren't very linear. What would happen happen is you'd get going through the process, but then it would start to branch off. And then those branches would have branches, and pretty soon it became, where are you in the process, and tracking it, particularly tracking down old ones just because of how the filing system is up there and trying to figure out what happened 10 years ago and where are we and things like that. To doing some of these now, like where are we in the process on this, that these will create a linear process, A to B, B to C, C to D, that you don't get to B until A is done, you don't get till C, D is done, and then that way the tracking becomes much easier. And then, for example, we would have roads, houses are being built, and the road's not even accepted, or things like that, that we don't want those issues to come up. That way, it's very step by step to make sure everything's done in the appropriate. Overall, that's the goal with these, is that's how it'll be set up. And the subdivision regulations have a total of 4 different chapters.
Okay.
This chapter is, what it had was subdivision, like the process. So we took that out and we divided that into major subdivision, which is what you think like with cul-de-sacs and lots and things like that, and minor subdivision, which is essentially lot splits. Because when we changed chapter 1113, that included both major and minor subdivisions, so we broke those out into 2 separate chapters. So one's for if you're building roads, and that would be the major. If you're just splitting a lot, that's a minor.
Okay.
I guess I have 2 questions for you, Scott, or one's, I guess I should be recognized then. All right, that's cool. The first one is, I think it would behoove us all if, when you send this to council and say, our deadline's gonna be this date, it may be a little bit of extra work, but if you put a paragraph or an info page that describes exactly what you just said right there, it would not hurt.
I agree. I totally agree.
Because those of us on the development committee, we kind of know where it is. But if I'm Mr. Lee or Mr. Powell, I haven't been privy to that, which is a great explanation. What we're doing here is making this more linear. That's why this had to be done in the first place. So that's what this was. That was our goal. Questions directed to me. Blah blah blah.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. When I send that out, I'll be sure to kind of give a summary of what's happening.
So now that this process, and this is more education for me, now that this process is more linear, now that we've taken steps to kind of address the advancement or the march that a developer, right, or somebody takes when they undertake something like this, how do you determine plans in the pipeline where they are in the process?
What we did is there is like preliminary. So how it'll go is you do a pre-application meeting, and that's where you as a developer say, I'm interested in this piece of property. So we're not going to jump right into, well, here's my application and go into Planning and Zoning Commission. We're all going to sit down and we're going to take a look, give you some feedback. We're aware of what's going on and make sure that they're aware of what's going on. The next step is the preliminary plan. And after that would be the preparation of the construction plans, final plan, and then they can begin construction. And then once everything is accepted, then they can move on to the final plat. And that's where the streets are formally designated, the lots are official, they can begin selling lots, and then they can move on from there. So it became where the plat's going in, streets are still being built, the lots are created, now I'm selling this lot, but there's no street, and it got kind of the cart before the horse, plus there's one subdivision that it's platted, the lots legally exist, the right-of-way is there, but the plans have expired and they weren't renewed by council. So we have lots, go out to a field, all those are lots, and if there's nothing there and nothing going to be there anytime. So it created an issue that, through our experience working with this, it became problematic that, well, now that's platted, that's legal, but there's no streets, there's no infrastructure in place, there's nothing. So we didn't want to do that again, but I got off topic. But to answer your question, what we did is with the approvals in here of the preliminary plan and final plan, you get a period of 2 years that it's valid. And let's say these are adopted in April, and a plan comes in May and goes through as it approved. They have 2 years, and if we change the regulations in June, it's still valid under these. But after that 2 years, if they haven't taken the next step, they can request an extension, but there's a provision here that says we do not guarantee that you will not be, the new regulations will be applicable to your project. So preliminary plans, as it's written now, you get a period of 1 year that it's valid, that you need to take the next step. Final plans are good in perpetuity, which became problematic because if this was done 10 years ago, it's
Yeah.
valid forever, and engineering drawings need to be changed. There are certain zoning regulations still may not be there, so this way it keeps things up to date.
How are you? How many plans are represented by? It's ready in perpetuity. Like I went through this in 2000. Hicken Acres is going to be across the street, and so it's good forever. How many instances are you aware of that that's the case?
Top of my head, I'd say about 2 or 3.
Okay.
Because we're kind of building out through those now. That's been some of the basis for saying we really need to get these reworked so that we don't recreate these issues. So I'd say 2 to 3 at this point that I can think of off the top of my head. Because I think the one that's already platted but nothing's there, that plan is expired, so they have to start all over anyway. So that's kind of off the board. However, you can't really, kind of bounded by what's already there.
Right.
So 2, 3.
Okay. So it goes, I'm sorry, Development Committee, then to Planning, and
Yes.
and then back to Council to be adopted.
Yes, there are, I believe that council can just say, I think they have the discretion to skip planning commission. However, since this is kind of one of the basic tenets of what they do,
Yeah.
I personally, I'd be reluctant to skip them, but that would be at the pleasure of council to say, you know what?
No, I wouldn't mind that.
I believe we need to send it to him.
So it would be development committee says okay, then we take it to planning commission, and then on to council.
All right.
Alrighty. Our favorite topic in the entire world. Are we going to talk about the comprehensive plan now?
The deadline was the 10th. We received 5 RFQs. Today we compiled those into packets for BJ, Alan, Nate, and myself. And I believe the idea is to meet next week and go over those, score them, and determine who we'd like to meet with, have the conversation, kind of the interview, and the next steps from there. And then a lot of the questions the development committee had, I think we could get answered at that time.
Okay.
There are specific questions that you'd like us to ask during that, feel free to.
I think, and I don't know if you've received the same feedback, Tim, and I've gotten it from both the individual that I recommended for a spot on that committee and other people, is that they're concerned that the committee is just going to become like a check mark, just to say, we involve the community. But ultimately, all the work and the decisions and everything are going to be done by a vendor, outside vendor. And my thinking is I would like the committee to drive and almost give direction to the hired party on how to proceed with things. Unless I'm missing something I'm not seeing, but I really prefer that the people who we've assigned and who live in this community, who, represent the different parts, would be the ones kind of driving that along in the direction.
And from my experience with these, how I've done it is you'll have a survey that you can put, and back in the olden days, we had to mail it out with a self-addressed stamped envelope and return it back, but with the success of some of our surveys we've had online, I think that would be a good place to start. So you get community involvement that way. Also, you do a couple public workshops.
Okay.
But from my experience, it would be, for example, we're going to craft a survey. All right, steering committee, here's a list of 100 questions. How many do we want to do? What ones do we want to narrow it down to? So it's the staff, the consultant will kind of steer the direction. Here's what we're on to next. And then say, present options. Do we like this? Do we like this? Do we like a combination? But it won't be, all right, so here's this. Make sure that's okay. It is great, and take it back.
Okay.
They're driving the bus, but the consultant or the folks will tell them where to go.
I got you.
We'll keep everything on track and moving along, and this is the process. And I'm sure, I'm sure they have ways they approach it, but I'm sure they're used to working with the community. Say we're looking for this aspect of it, this aspect of it, and this aspect of it as part of the process. So it won't be them just here's a blank piece of paper, you write this section, but it won't be we wrote everything's great, just tell us so. It'll be them presenting them with options and saying here's this information, what do we think, and then getting feedback from the steering committee. But there'll also be overarching a greater public process that'll be open to the entire community, that information will filter down to the steering committee and then filter down from there. So it's kind of a two-stage. So while the consultant will be kind of moving things along, they need that feedback from the steering committee. That's how it's been every time I've done a comprehensive plan. I can't imagine it would be too far off with that. So there will be plenty of public process involved, because you don't want them to, you don't want them to take an old one off the shelf and cross out,
Right.
Shelbyville and write it Bethesda. It's not going to work. So, and I think planning and zoning department will be involved with this to make sure that the city's interests are being represented and they're not just doing this formulaic.
Right.
Here's what we do now, here's what we do now, and everything's just recycled. So.
Perfect.
And I think we'll also kind of vet that when we meet with them and say, here's kind of what we're thinking, and see how amenable they are to that.
As badly as we need it, I don't want us to rush it forward, just like what you were saying, like them pulling one off the shelf and trying to fit us into another model. And I guess just personally, I don't want to ask somebody to sit on a steering committee who is already busy and got a lot of things going on but have agreed to do it, and then it's more just fluff and they don't really have any role. Yeah, and I would not insult someone that way. You know what I mean?
I completely agree, and that is not something staff standpoint that we want to happen
Okay.
either.
Perfect.
So we need feedback, from, it'll be community at large, and then down through the steering committee,
And then down.
yeah. So
Okay.
it'll will be a lot of public process, and the steering committee will be utilized instead of just, well, we gave it to the steering committee, we checked that box.
Right.
On to the next.
Okay.
I guess I have a couple of things on that subject. The first one is you'll remember that I think more than one of us was slightly surprised by the idea of an outside consultant. I thank you for meeting with me so that you could explain to me exactly the ins and the outs and the reasons for that. So I really appreciated you doing that. with that said, I don't know that I saw a line item in the budget for this.
Correct.
And so it's just a bug in your ear.
From what I recall with our discussions, BJ and Jamie, there were discussions when we were crafting the budget. Do we do something? Do we not? There was talking about surplus income from this year that are applied to it. Out of turn because they said, we'll take care of that aspect.
Okay. Well, I'm just,
It is being considered amongst the budget and how to address that. I completely agree.
and since I was surprised by that subject, I also will be anxiously awaiting. I have no clue when you open the bids and you guys sit down and talk, where is it going to be? So I'll be pretty anxiously awaiting that information as well.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
We'll definitely take a look at that with some of those things we've already done, or if there's certain aspects that the planning and zoning department out with, or other staff members that say, we'll tell you what, we'll take care of that one, cross that off.
That was my next part of my question. If somebody says, well, here's what we anticipate, and having you guys be able to say, okay, look, you don't have to do section 5 and 6.
Yes. That
We'll
would be-
we'll do 5 and 6. Don't let's deal with the situation as it. So that's that. The other thing that I would remind everybody about is, I don't think that the mayor is sitting the steering committee until after the first of the year, and just there's a possibility that I may not even be here, kind of a situation. So we need to remember, if elections change the makeup, we need to get in touch with the current, and if it stands and it holds as it is, then there's no problem. But if it's different, just kind of make yourself a mental note that says, hey, we plan on doing this right after the first of the year. Hi, I'm the planning and zoning director. I'd like your person.
Yeah, and I don't know procedurally how we formally say everyone's making a choice. These are the folks that were selected. This is a steering committee. I don't know how we.
I think it's up to the mayor, since we formally said it was a steering committee, but I would bow to Kathy on that, or anybody else.
In the past, the mayor would bring forth the names, council would confirm those names.
Okay.
And then they said official.
Tim, why do you think he's not going to do that until the first of the year?
Well, because we won't even have the possibility to. I mean, we're not even opening the bids, or we're not even awarding the bids till when?
We were gonna meet, I believe, next Friday to review everything, and then set up interviews after that.
I just have a funny feeling that it's going to bleed into the steering committee. BJ, do you see it as being this year or next year?
This year.
Oh, okay. Maybe
Yeah, I
I'm-
was
certainly
gonna say
do.
that I think you're actually thinking.
My
even
goal is to have it November.
like moving faster rather than
Yeah.
slower.
I'd rather have it move faster than slower, but I thought I specifically heard that they were not going to sit until after the first of the year.
No, my goal is to get it started this year, have it this year's purchase order to get it started. We've got them. They're going to be the copies are going to be distributed to every department head and myself to review and bring it to council. I would like to come to council's second meeting in November for it and get it started this year.
I think we would, if I'm what Tim is,
I'm sorry, just to join,
spit
but
it out. Was the concern that, because December being a busy month for a lot of people, and that being the first time that the steering committee actually came together, maybe they weren't going to actually have their first meeting until January.
Well, even
was where
then,
I kind of-
let's just say I'm defeated. My nominee no longer sits. So what are you going to do? That's,
we're going to head forward with the steering committee that has been appointed during those who are sitting during their current terms.
fine with me.
Okay.
I think that's the only right thing to do instead
Agreed.
of waiting to see who wins or
I'm
who
a big
loses,
believer in
who's
sooner
here.
rather than later on this subject,
Right.
so I got no problem with that,
Right.
as long as that is how, as long as that's cricket, as my dad used to say.
Yes.
So we'll just need to memorialize that or make some way to formally adopt that.
Okay. Andy?
Good, Kathy.
And formally adopt
or formally create the steering committee.
Well, and I think part of that is when we come to council seeking authorization for the contract for the comprehensive plan, that kind of kicks it off. And we already asked for nominations for the steering committee, and I think that we've got most, if not all of them, at this point, and I think it's bringing them together.
When you say, real quick, when you say the bids for the comprehensive plan, we're asking a consultant to come in to help us with the comprehensive, help Scott essentially put
Correct.
together.
Help
So this
Scott
is-
and help the steering committee.
Right, this is our comprehensive
Help
plan.
the city.
Right.
Help
City's
the-
comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
Right.
What I will say is help Scott, help the community, help our community partners, the fire, the police, the schools, the water and sewer district, our water and sewer district, the steering committee to do this. I don't want this just to be like, hey, what should land use be? I want this to be expansive as looking at traffic, utilities, schools, fire response, police response. So
Well, we just had a discussion about that before you guys came in the room, that the direction that the path it would take, because I'm not going to ask somebody to sit on a committee that's just a placeholder, saying, oh, well, they did it, they had a steering committee and there they are, that it was going to be actually steered by the steering committee.
Absolutely.
So, and, Scott gave us the, basically it's the public at large, the larger public with some type of a survey that funnels down to the steering committee, who then, analyzes it, whatever, then down towards, staff, and then to the consultant, who ultimately is just trying to keep us on the track to move forward while we're making the decisions. So, because that was important to
great way to put it.
both of us, well, Tim and I, when we were sitting here and talking about that. So we had that clarified just a couple minutes ago.
One thing, when we've had these steering committee / ad hoc, once the committee is appointed and confirmed, they're given a charge of what they are to do and a date to report back. Now, that date can be extended by council at any time they see fit, but that is all part of setting it up initially.
Appreciate it.
Okay, keep her moving. Fee schedule.
With that, we have been, planning and zoning board has been looking at the fee schedule to determine any tweaks that might be necessary. And then it became obvious as we moved forward with the food truck regulations and the revised subdivision regulations, there are certain things that are not on there. So those were added. There's also, we have repeated issues where the way that the fee schedule is structured, that it has a sliding scale, or, from first 10 acres, then 11 to 50, and then anything over 50, it becomes problematic with the person submitting their fee versus what the fee schedule's intent is. So the goal is to have more flat fees for things, so that if you're doing preliminary plan, it's $1,000. So we get the check, because we spend a lot of time, we get the check, we have to call them back and say the check's not correct, and then we have to wait for the check to come back, and then it's a lot of back and forth that
Right.
doesn't seem to be necessary, that if we just had a flat fee, that would make things easier for all parties involved, that it was very easily understood instead of leaving anything open to interpretation. And the developer, I interpret things this way, well, planning and zoning department interprets the fee schedule this way. So these are just some proposals on that. Also, there are some things in there that we currently require a fee for, that planning and zoning department does not feel is necessary, such as hot tubs. There are no regulations for hot tubs. I don't know what we're checking for hot tubs. I know in the past that we would check the electric connection, but no one, planning and zoning department is a qualified electrician to check that, so we no longer do that. If someone were to do a hot tub, more than likely would be on a patio or a deck or something like that, which there proposed to remove alterations to zoning permits, that if someone comes in, they need to tweak their site plan, I don't want to have to charge them $50, which is the same as a brand new permit. We're more than happy to tweak zoning permits as needed. So there was a few things on there that we didn't think were necessary, and then some of the other additions were based upon the revised subdivision regulations and the addition of the food truck regulations to get those in there.
When are you looking for a proposal to council for this?
Right now, this was just kind of putting them out there for feedback. I think you're low, I think you're high. If the development committee is okay or has a chance to look at it, maybe the next meeting in November, we can take a look and we can have something more formal. And then if the development committee is okay with that, then we can start the planning commission if necessary and for the next topic.
PJ?
And also part of the fee schedule starts tonight also with an ordinance to amend the capacity fees for water and sewer, which will certainly need to be captured in the new fee schedule.
Okay.
I looked at them briefly. I always like to see fees go down as long as it's not hamstringing us or hurting us. And so I applaud the instances where you've said, why in the world are you paying us $25 for a hot tub? We have no hot tub experience or expertise. So anytime that stuff like that gets streamlined at the government level, I'm down. So, and I don't have the knowledge to know if they seem particularly high or low, but they seemed fine to me. I mean, just on first blush. So.
And I will say also, the zoning amendment, if people get an approval, pay $50 for it, to make a small amendment, they shouldn't have to pay more
Agreed.
for just something that they want to come in and change slightly.
Yeah, lowering them is always my goal.
Scott, on your floodplain, construction and floodplain, what exactly are you guys doing with that? It says actual cost.
That is a carryover from the last fee schedule and the fee schedule before it. So
Is that like actual cost of running the city, or what? I mean,
I'm assuming it's actual cost of the construction within the floodplain. I don't know for sure.
what does the city do though? Are we checking survey? Are we going to go out and look to see if they've got, for instance, in some places in a floodplain, you have to have 2 feet above any opening has to be 2 feet above floodplain, and they make them show that on a survey. Is that the cost of reviewing that survey? Is that what it is, or?
I honestly do not know.
Okay.
I have not had any experience. No one since I've been here has built a floodplain. So we don't have any track record on this to say this is how this works or how it doesn't work. But that is something we could look into to maybe do a flat fee of X.
Yeah, I would just wonder what we would be, kind of back to the hot tub issue. If we're not checking anything, what are we charging them?
I know we're checking things. We have a very, very comprehensive section on floodplain and construction therein.
Okay.
I have not explored it because I've had no reason to at this time. But
Okay.
I think if we just make it a flat fee plus the engineer review fee, I think that's more than acceptable. Because I don't think we would be reviewing this permit any more than we would any other similar permit for like a major development, something where we're really gonna have to look at, like you said, the elevations, are they over 2 feet above, some of those things that we'd have to check. But I think, the deposit is $500. My initial thought as a starting place would be $500 plus the engineer review. But I can look through the code section to see
Yeah, see what we have to do.
exactly
Right.
it entails.
And then one last thing, on your minor subdivision lot split, is that for an engineering signature? I mean, what does, I'm trying to remember what the city does with a lot split. I know we don't we have to approve it before it goes to the county, essentially?
Yes, what happens, and with the new subdivision regulations, we've identified 2 types of lot splits, and we call them now minor subdivisions. So one type would be the traditional lot split where you have the lot, we're cutting it in half. Another one, for example, would be you have two adjacent property owners, somebody's giving the other guy
15 feet.
15 feet. So that would be an exempted lot split. What we do is they fill out an application, have the proposed split and a survey, and then a legal description. We stamp both of those, give them back to the applicant, and they take them to the county for recording.
Okay, so we don't have a review involved in this. This is just to say, we have the paperwork. We're not saying it's right necessarily, but we have the paperwork.
We review it, particularly for a lot split, to make sure it complies with zoning.
Okay, so $15 of somebody's time is what that is.
For an exempted lot split, yes, that would be, because that is not privy to the zoning requirements, just because of its property swap, it's not a new buildable lot. So that's to go through and review, make sure they have everything, the stamps, et cetera. The traditional lot split is much more involved because we look at that, make sure that the lot meets zoning requirements, it's buildable, et cetera.
That one seems a little low to me, by the way. The $15 one seems a little bit low.
We can adjust that.
Just
Again,
kind
that
of-
was a carryover.
Yeah.
That was a carryover from the previous fee schedule.
Got it.
Fences.
We doubled down to get the subdivision regulations done. So while we've been looking into fences and cell towers to expedite the subdivision regulations, we kind of focused our time on that to get that through.
Perfect. Okay. Are there any other topics that we need to cover in the next 10 minutes?
Can we go just to food truck for a second? Because I know it's on tonight's agenda. Just a quick question for you. So the $25, so I noticed in here, let me go back to this. I noticed there's a revision, proposed revision. I don't know if you guys talked about this before I got in here, and I apologize if you had. You have in here a maximum of 3 vending permits, so 180 days essentially is what they could be a food vendor in Pataskla for. Is that the gist of that?
Correct. The intent of the regulations was for food trucks to be temporary by nature. And they're designed to be that way. However, what we found out is it's not expressly mentioned in here that trucks are temporary. It's not to be, I'm moving my food truck into this piece of property, I'm gonna be here without moving it for the next 10 years. Because the way that it was written, I could come in every 60 days and get a new permit in perpetuity.
So the question I was going to ask on that is, we have many community events, and let's just say we have 4 of them that a food truck would be proper to be at. You're saying that they have to pick, they can't be at all 4.
I believe in the regulations.
If the months don't work out right.
I believe in the regulations, it omits outdoor activities.
Well, that's kind of brings me to another question on that. It does do that, you're right. It does omit that. The purpose of this food truck vending permit is for the safety of the community. It's for you guys to be able to get at least health certificates from them, to inspect them, to make sure they have one receptacle and this, that, the other. So I guess, so I went back through the food truck ordinance as it's written now, and I tried to remember why we exempted the community event, essentially, if there was a community permit, because that community permit holder isn't going to go get the health care or the health permit from them, or do an inspection, or make sure they have a trash receptacle. So if you could remind, I guess this is kind of a question, why did we exempt that portion? Why did we exempt that activity from getting a vendor's license?
If I can, certainly part of the community activities or community event permit is talking about what food trucks they're going to have there, and I think that responsibility falls strictly on whoever's throwing the event to make sure they have them. If we want to use street fair as an example, the health department does come out and do inspections to make sure everybody has their stuff. I also know that, if you look at, the trucks at fireworks, whatever, they certainly have theirs as well. So that responsibility, I feel, falls to whoever's pooling that community events permit, not just your standalone
So, okay, so let me ask, so if those Summit Lions are putting on the power show, this would be whoever's running the power show, it's their responsibility to go to every food truck and say, hey, give me your health certificate, give me your limit of liability, make sure you've got the checklist essentially done. That's their responsibility. And then does the city check to make sure that they've done that?
I would say as far as hiring them, yes, it is their responsibility, and that'll be part of the new regulations for these community activities.
Okay. Well, the other question I had in there is it's kind of a little bit vague in the ordinance. It talks about what the food truck vending, and I'm trying to find it here really quickly so I can bring it up, in the ordinance. On this section, it talks about in 7/1905, insurance required for operation. So my question is, if it is a outdoor event, if it is what we call an outdoor public entertainment activity, this, when I read this, it doesn't necessarily say that they're coming in for a permit, but it says, and I'll quote, "No mobile food vendor shall cause to operate any mobile food vending unit within the city of Pataskala without doing both of the following." So you got an A and a B. Is that exclusive or independent of getting a permit?
That would be part of the permit.
Well, but the way it's written, so the reason why I'm asking this is, the way it's written does not say, as part of getting a permit, you have to do one of these two things. It says if you are a food vendor, period, you got to do these things. And one of them is general liability. The second one is affirm in writing that you've indemnified the city. I think those are both important things to do without a permit even, if you're operating a food vendor, if you're a food vendor in Pataskala. And it shouldn't be, my opinion again, Summit Lions Club responsibility that to make them do those two things. You see what I'm saying, Scott? When I'm reading this, it doesn't say that this is a part of the permit. This says being a food vendor, you got to do this.
Correct. As part of a mobile food vendor. Then later on, it excludes if you're doing an outdoor activity. This is not applicable to you on the way it's written here in terms of you have to get this separate permit. You are covered under the outdoor activity permit, but these requirements are the responsibility of the person pulling the outdoor activity permit.
So just to make sure I'm right on this, so Summit Lions, under the power show, would have gone to the city administrator, or his designee, to give a certificate of general liability insurance for anybody out there who's operating, whatever food vendor, whatever, I don't know, craft show person, doesn't matter. Archery, I'll use archery as an example. He's giving a general liability insurance for all that operation. Under this, when you're reading this, you're giving that outdoor permittee has a lot of responsibility and a lot of legal responsibility for everybody that's under that activity. When I would argue that your actual permit language doesn't exempt the food vendor from having to get that.
It does, because it says that they will not be required with an outdoor activity permit.
It says underneath
Then
here
those
that it says,
regulations would apply to anybody who's coming in under that.
I think it's vague here. I just would hope that we could look at that a little bit stronger.
Certainly will.
Okay, I just would. This one worries me that when you say you don't need a permit, that's one thing, but your permit language doesn't exclude this, doesn't say under this permit you're required to do this and this. It says if you are a food vendor, you got to do this and this.
Right, but then it clearly exempts them if it's under the provision.
Okay.
It clearly does.
Well, under my trained eye, it doesn't, so I'm just letting you know, I would definitely look at that a little
Very good.
closer.
If I can also, when we look at, and I'll use the street fair again, they carry their own liability insurance for anybody who works underneath them. The fireworks carry their own liability insurance for whoever works underneath them. So those people would be covered in that regard. So
In a contractual obligation?
I'm not a trained eye, so
So, I mean, I'm bringing this up only because we need to look at this under the community
we certainly
events.
will.
Okay.
Definitely.
Point made. Mr. Hicken?
Scott, I had briefly discussed this question with you, and it has to do with what would you anticipate while food vendors have become Joe's Fabulous Pizza Oven on wheels? There are also the people that go to construction sites on multiple locations. How do you experience that? And if not, would they be subject to this? I think they would.
They would be subject to this, but we have not seen anyone that, here for 2 hours, I'm there for 2 hours, I'm there for 2 hours.
Okay, and it kind of goes back to the 180 days thing. So if we suddenly began to see that, when I think I've mostly seen it at it's construction based. They don't want the construction guys don't want to leave. They just want to grab a sandwich. I'll be here from 11 to 12. By the way, I'll be over there. You tell that construction crew, I'll drive across there and I'll be there from 12 to 1, and you stop at 4 places, and this would not cover that because of the 180 days, or I'm sorry, the three time limit per location.
We have yet to see that.
Okay.
Everything that we have, all the inquiries regarding food trucks that we've received have either been, I'm gonna come to this parking lot every Tuesday, or the other where it's like, I'm gonna set up on this piece of property in perpetuity. And it's essentially gonna be a food truck that's acting as a restaurant. Those are pretty much the only two, well, they are the only two inquiries we've had. We've never had anyone, nor have I seen anyone going from site to site to
Okay.
with their food truck.
And if you suddenly began to see it, you'd see possibly make an amendment to this?
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Okay, there's a public meeting in about 7 minutes. So quickly, anything else we need to talk about before we adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Kathy?
Carter,
Yes.
Hicken,
Yes?
Walters.
Here, yes, here.
Adjourn.
Here you go.